Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. And if you're new to my channel, hello. My name is Caitlin Elliott, and I cover true crime cases on Tuesdays and Fridays, with my more vintage cases being posted on Fridays. Now, if this is something that interests you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you get alerted of every time that I upload. So, in my previous video, we talked about the case of the unsolved murder of Fiona Yu. And in today's video, we are going to be discussing the case of Ebony Simpson. In August of 1992, a town in Australia known as Bargo would endure a completely horrific crime that nobody was expecting. A young and innocent little 9-year-old girl named Ebony Simpson would vanish from the local community without a trace. It was almost as if Ebony would disappear into thin air. She had last been seen walking home from school that day before she would vanish, and her abduction was said to completely rock the community to its core. This particular afternoon was August 19th of 1992, and Ebony would exit her school bus and walk up the road to her home like she normally would, but unfortunately, Ebony would never arrive at her house. The Simpson family moved to Bargo, Australia, shortly after Ebony was born, and they purchased a newly renovated farmhouse in the countryside since the family really wanted to experience the country lifestyle. This location was considered to be the perfect place to raise their family. Ebony was born on December 22nd of 1982 and was the youngest of 3 siblings, growing up with 2 older brothers. So, these older brothers absolutely adore her. She was just the light of her family's life. She was the youngest, she was the only girl, she was just darling. She grew up extremely close with her mother since they were the 2 females in the house. And, Ebony would tell her mother practically everything, and they would have very special private moments together. The day before Ebony would go missing, there was actually a meeting at her elementary school about the importance of stranger danger. Considering what happened to her, this is extremely eerie and disturbing to think about. Ebony came home from school that day, and she talked with her mother, Christine, about what the meeting had said. Her mother then informs her that if anything would happen to Ebony to make her feel uncomfortable in any way, shape, or form, she needed to tell her mother, Christine, right away. So Ebony, she nodded in understanding, and she promised her mother that she would tell her anything if she ever would encounter a creep individual. She then hugged and kissed her mother goodnight, and she went to bed early. This conversation was said to have been the very last conversation that Christine and Ebony would ever have. The usual school routine for the family was that Ebony's mother would meet her at the school bus stop every afternoon when school had let out to walk her back to her home. So, on this particular day, because Ebony's mother, Christine, was said to have worked from home, so it was pretty convenient for her to just go over and walk to the bus stop to go and pick up her daughter. But on this particular day, she was just completely engulfed and overwhelmed with the amount of work that she had to do. So, Christine ended up sending one of her sons to go to the bus stop and pick up Ebony once she got let off. Ebony's elementary school was said to have been only 5 kilometers away from the family home, but the bus ride to the stop was 10 miles, and the walk from the bus stop back to the home was only a 5-minute walk. Unfortunately, due to the change of plans from Christine, Ebony's older brother had to meet her there at the bus stop instead once he exited his bus. These changes would ultimately lead to something absolutely horrific happening. Ebony's older brother's bus unfortunately arrived at the bus stop a lot later than what it normally would arrive, and he noticed right away that his sister was not there waiting for him. He really didn't think anything about this because he just assumed that Ebony had already been picked up by their mother and was home. Once he got home, though, he noticed that neither Ebony nor Christine had arrived back home. After an hour or 2, Christine would arrive home, and she instantly knew that something was just not right. And this was when she saw that her son was home without Ebony. Peter, who was Ebony's father, quickly notified the police that she was in fact missing, while his wife Christine traveled to the bus stop to look for Ebony. She ran up and down the road calling her daughter's name, checking in the creek to see if she was there with friends swimming, and she even went next door and knocked, assuming that Ebony may have possibly traveled here because she was afraid of something and she was very responsible and would not be home alone. Unfortunately, this neighbor did not know where Ebony was and said that she was not inside her home. The local authorities traveled to the Simpson family home and they quickly began a search for the missing girl. By 1700 that afternoon, on August 19th of 1992, Ebony had already been missing for well over an hour. Knowing this, it became possible that she could literally be anywhere in the country, or she possibly could even be at an airport or was taken out of the country. After a while, the police were notified about a possible sighting of the little girl that was called into the local authorities. This witness was a teenage boy who claimed to have seen her get off the bus that day on Bargo Road and began to make her way to her home, but this could not officially be verified by authorities. There was a second sighting as well that could also not be truly verified, and this account was given by an older man who had approached authorities after being curious about their presence in the area. The police questioned him about whether or not he had seen anything suspicious pertaining to the disappearance of Ebony Simpson, and this was when he informed the police that his two sons had seen Ebony walking home from school that day, and just before she turned the corner, there was a small yellow car that was parked with a man fixing it with the hood up. The witnesses' sons waved at this man in the yellow car to say hello, and this is when they both noticed Ebony in the back seat waving back at them with a smile. The family then continued on home and really didn't think anything about this sighting until Ebony was reported missing. This new information was brought forward to the authorities that had actually, placed someone in the area at the same time as Ebony. When this information would come forward, there was a detective who then arrived at Ebony's house to, speak to her parents about this. And while speaking to the parents, the detective wanted to know, anything that he could to find out any information about Ebony as they could. Any type of information about her. I'm talking about they wanted to know her behavior, how she would act normally, the clothing that she wore the day that she went missing, what type of hobbies she had, what she was interested in. And these were all said to be extremely vital to the investigation to figure out what she could have done and where she could have gone. After a few minutes of interviewing Christine, authorities could instantly tell that this behavior was not normal of Ebony, and it was not in her character to do so. Ebony was described as a very bright, responsible, and reliable young girl, and it wasn't like she would go anywhere. She would never go anywhere without telling her parents, and she certainly wouldn't get into a car with someone that she did not know. She was last seen around the time that she was seen exiting the school bus, meaning that whomever took Ebony did so at this time and became extremely frustrating to the family and authorities. Not only were her parents and older brothers panicking over Ebony's disappearance, but authorities began receiving multiple alarming calls about Ebony. So in every single one of these calls, it was mentioned that she was last seen walking towards a stranger's car, which was really bizarre because they had just had that stranger danger talk at the school prior to her, going missing. Her mother then stated to the reporters that, she felt like it was very concerning that a little girl couldn't even walk home from school without being targeted and, something happening to her. At this point in the evening, Ebony had now been missing for several hours with no other sightings since the ones that were called in when she originally went missing. Because of these sightings of her and the information that there was in fact a strange vehicle lurking around in the area, officers then decide that they were going to try to piece together all of this information to see if it all linked up. There was now a search done for Ebony, and her case became an official criminal investigation because the authorities believed that she had in fact been abducted. Around 2100, which is 9 p.m., the news of Ebony's abduction it began to spread through the local community. The authorities decided that it was probably best to enlist in the assistance of the public to help search for this little girl. So the more people they had helping search, the quicker that she would be located. Because, it's just a police department. There's only so many people in the police department that could go out and do this. They needed more help, and the public decided they were going to try and help in any way that they can. The main priority that the police had at this point was to just locate Ebony and recover her alive. So anyone who could search for her did so. And I'm talking like strangers, there was children, Boy Scouts, all that stuff going out and looking for her. Unfortunately, the minutes began to turn into very long, agonizing hours with absolutely no sign of the 9-year-old little girl. On Thursday, August 20th of 1992, the search party continued to try and locate the missing young Ebony. The lead detective on the investigative team decided to try and establish any type of bizarre behaviors leading up to Ebony's abduction. The authorities decided to ask Christine if she had noticed anyone suspicious lurking around the area the days leading up to the abduction, and this is when she actually stated to the authorities about how she had actually seen this man who was parked down near the bus stop the day that she had walked her daughter over there. And, noticed that he was parked there in a yellow vehicle. Authorities really raised their eyebrows at this information because this is the second time that this yellow vehicle was reported being seen in the area by witnesses. So the police decided to interview multiple neighbors in the area about whether or not anyone else had seen this yellow vehicle, and the majority of them claimed to have seen this yellow vehicle stalking the area for the past couple weeks. Because of this information, the yellow vehicle became the prime vehicle in the investigation and in the case. So the detectives wanted to see if this yellow car had actually matched the description of the one driven by Ebony's abductor. So they interviewed the teenage witnesses once again to get more information about this yellow car. They stated right away that the specific car that had abducted Ebony was a yellow Mazda 808 with the hood up, and there was a man outside of the car digging around in the hood with a black object in his hand as if he was trying to do some car work. The witness also claimed to have seen auto work that was also done to the car, and it was absolutely just splattered from head to toe with mud. So this looked like a really sketchy looking vehicle. As more information about the vehicle was reported, the officers, they worked with Ebony's parents to continue the search for the little girl. There were 2 detectives that were sent to the Simpson household later that week to try and get an accurate description of what Ebony had been wearing on the day of her disappearance, to help put that out there in the news, because it's possible if she was going out and about with this guy, she could possibly still be wearing the same clothing. Authorities then wanted to check and see if she had any type of problems at home or at school, so they could rule out the chance of Ebony being a runaway accurately. On August 20th of 1992, Ebony had officially been missing for 18 hours at this point, and on this day there was actually an official police task force that set up a main headquarters right outside of the Simpson family residence, and a lot of the members of the community, tried their best to help these officers that had set up this, headquarters with the search for Ebony. Many concerned residents and officers were almost practically desperate to try to find her as quickly as possible. So all of the groups were then broken down into smaller groups that would go and search very specific locations. So one location we given to each group. So locals, they would walk over to the police station and they would try to offer their assistance to help look for Ebony in any way that they could, and they were given, different places to search as well. It was soon announced that the authorities and searchers were looking for a specific vehicle in relation to the abduction. As they were looking for this car, the yellow car with all the mud and everything splattered all over it, kind of a little dingy, a little sketchy, there was a searcher who noticed a police officer nearby, and he pulled him aside and said, "You mean like that yellow car right there?" As the police sergeant turns to look at this yellow vehicle that this guy pointed out, it was in fact a yellow Mazda parked at the main command post, but they really wanted to just double check and make sure if this was in fact a yellow Mazda 808. The police made their way over to the front to see if this was indeed, the car that this car was a yellow Mazda 808 style vehicle, just to double check and make sure it's connected to the case. The detectives then decided it was best to not act on impulsivity. Even someone could have the same type of car, it could just been a coincidence. So they started asking Christine to describe the man that she saw who drove the same style and color of vehicle. She did in fact provide a very accurate description of the abductor to authorities, and they were able to sketch the man as the main suspect in the case. The detective then took the sketch of the abductor to the lead detective on the case, and he showed him that this was the man that Christine had seen take Ebony. The lead detective on the case was absolutely just stunned beyond belief. I mean, his jaw dropped, his eyes were just wide as saucers to see this picture, and he really didn't know what to say, except once he was able to get his cool back, he said, "I had just spoken to that guy earlier. That exact same guy." The detectives decided to secretly monitor the yellow Mazda that was parked in the area to see who came back to it, and as this was going on, there was another policeman who was searching for Ebony. They came to Christine at her home. He stated that they all believed the guy who was responsible for taking her was on her property, and they decided to have Christine come and inspect the vehicle that they had found. She went out front and stated that she was completely unsure if this was in fact the vehicle, because she believed that anyone could own a yellow Mazda that looked a little dingy. So, however, it was absolutely identical to the one driven by the abductor, and this information could not be ignored by investigators. The searcher's car had an identical resemblance to the yellow vehicle seen in the vicinity around the days surrounding Ebony's abduction, as if it had actually been stalking her in the area. What's even more bizarre is he also seemed to have known right away which house was hers and everything else before the news was even put out, because it said this yellow vehicle was the very first car that was there. So, according to the police, the abductor's description as provided by Christine was almost identical to what the young boys had provided to the authorities, but unfortunately, there wasn't any other types of information given about this abductor, which made the authorities have little to go off of at this point to search. After a few hours, this man had in fact, arrived back to his yellow Mazda 808 after searching all day for Ebony. The police then decided they were going to take this man in for questioning, and they asked him a few questions about his vehicle and what he had been doing while there was another detective who was taking pictures of the specific vehicle for evidence. The man who was the owner of the car, he actually did not mind the authorities, asking him all these questions, which, most people would be like, "Why are you asking me? Like, this is just weird." And he remained quiet, only speaking when spoken to. This man was said to not raise any type of suspicion to the local authorities that he was any way possibly involved in the abduction of Ebony Simpson. The authorities checked his vehicle to see if there's anything suspicious inside, while they also checked the trunk for evidence, but they never found anything suspicious. However, the police were not fazed by this, because they knew that they needed to get this vehicle down to their station to run some tests on it. There were specific measures taken to tow the man's vehicle to the police garage, and after this they had searched the vehicle for any type of evidence that he had put Ebony in his car, whether or not it was physical or not. They just wanted to get any type of information that could link him to the crime. I mean, come on now, it's the same vehicle, the same color, and the same weirdo looking dude in the area. I mean, I believe in coincidences, but this can't be a coincidence. Like, so the man decided to go to the police station for questioning, and he is led inside as they try to figure out what exactly they were going to do with this man at this point. He was extremely calm and collected during the interrogations, and this was when the authorities began to actually doubt whether or not he was truly involved in Ebony's abduction, just by how relaxed and calm, he seemed to be. So, as the questioning of the man, begins, the authorities quickly learn more about him, and they find out that his name is Andrew Garforth. Andrew had recently moved to New South Wales, Australia, from the western part of the country with his wife and his 2 young children of his own back in 1992. Back in this time, he only lived right up the road from Ebony, and her family was said to have been so he lived right up the road from Ebony and her family, and was said to have been completely, familiar with the route that she would take to and from school, to the bus stop, everything else. Because of the knowledge of Andrew living so close and the fact that he knew her routes, police were very eager to know if he was in fact involved in Ebony's abduction. He informs the police about how he had gone to the video store that day around the time of her disappearance, but he completely avoided being on Bargo Road at all. After a few questions, authorities asked him to repeat the answers, and get this. So the answers that Andrew had previously, replied to, they asked him to repeat those same ones to see if he would say the same thing, and he then comes up with a whole completely different story, a whole complete amount of different answers. And this was weird because even though authorities knew that he was on Arena Road, which was the very last road that Ebony was seen on, he was saying that he was never even there. After 15 minutes of intense questioning, Andrew Garforth then tells the police something that they were never even expecting to hear from him. He tells the police as calmly and as quietly as possible that he had actually abducted Ebony that day and placed her into the trunk of his vehicle. Yeah. There were over 300 people who came out to search for Ebony while voluntarily, search for Ebony voluntarily in that area. Her older brother's name was Zach, and this was the one who was supposed to meet her at the bus stop that day, and he had searched nearly everywhere he could possibly think of that Ebony could be at, because he knew his sister very well. He knew where she would go and play with her friends. He knew where she would go and just hang out. So as he was searching all these areas, anything he could possibly think of, there was no sign of her anywhere. Zach also mentioned that Ebony was very shy and street smart, not the type of girl who would ever get into a vehicle with somebody that she didn't know, because she was raised to be like that. However, it's possible that this abductor had stalked Ebony repeatedly, and this was enough to get her to trust him, and she would eventually go with him. So Andrew then informs police about how he had came around the corner of the roads that day and pulled over to the shoulder to put oil in his car because he was running low and his car was beginning to make some noises and smell. So he noticed Ebony actually walking closer to his car as he was putting the oil in, and unfortunately she never even passed the vehicle before he ended up snatching her from around the waist and pulled her into his car, driving down Arena quickly with Ebony in the back seat. At this point, the little girl was completely terrified out of her mind, and she began repeatedly asking Andrew if he had plans on letting her go. For this question, he claimed he had no idea if he would ever let her go, and he seemed to have no idea what he was doing. He was just acting very impulsively and chaotic, and it just seemed like it was just weird. This information was said to be very important to the authorities because this would help them figure out exactly what had happened to Ebony. After Andrew admitted to kidnapping Ebony, the authorities now became more desperate than ever to try and recover her safely and find her whereabouts. He then claimed to have driven Ebony into the desert before taking some wire from the backseat of his car, and he tied her hands around her back, which, if you don't know about Australia, Australia is mostly a desert continent. Like, there's so much desert everywhere. So he tied her hands behind her back with wire and then ended up hog tying her. After this, Andrew stated that he actually picked her up and tossed her into a local dam and then drove away, leaving her there by herself in this dam, hogtied. After this information came out, authorities really tried to buckle down on trying to find Ebony as quickly as possible. It's a sincere possibility that authorities believe that, Andrew had been completely lying, was bullshitting them, making this all up. So, it was possible that she was somewhere completely different than what he had said. We've heard this over and over again about how the perpetrator would be behind the crimes and then lie about, what exactly happened to their victim over and over again, and again, come up with different stories and different scenarios. There was a possibility, that Ebony wasn't even in the country anymore. At 11 p.m. on August 20th of 1992, the authorities arrived at the scene of the crime as quickly as they could. This location was said to have been only 3.5 miles away from Ebony's home, so it's possible that the family even knew about this location, were familiar with this, and it's possible Ebony herself would even go there to spend time. So, despite authorities being informed that she had been tossed into the water like that, hogtied and everything, authorities really hoped to find Ebony alive out there in the water. However, one detective was horrified to find this pink lunchbox just floating in the water, and there was just no movement at all, which if someone was in the water and still alive, there would have been movements of them trying to escape. It was also said that the specific weather on that day that they had inspected the river was not a really windy day either. Authorities knew right away that Ebony had to be around the area they were looking at, and she either had to be in the water or on the banks of the river. At this point, the police then came to the conclusion and the understanding that Ebony she could not be alive at this point. And it was absolutely impossible to have her escape the water hogtied. At this point, all the authorities had left to do was to just dig through the river, and as they do, they find and locate Ebony Simpson's deceased body. It was determined that she officially passed away from drowning. Andrew then pulls aside the police detectives and explains to them in almost like this excited way, like he was completely thrilled. It was like he was talking about this movie he just saw last weekend that he thought was the best movie that he's ever seen. So, divers were then sent into the water to recover Ebony's body, which they do so successfully. The authorities then traveled to the home of Ebony Simpson to relay them the heartbreaking news that they had found their daughter's body. On that day at 2 a.m, the police traveled to the home and entered it to tell the family about how they found their baby girl's body in the water of a river nearby. Her mother was just absolutely devastated by this news and screamed on the top of her lungs, fell to her knees, and just sobbed. She begged for the detectives to let her hold little Ebony just one last time. And as she held her daughter in her arms, she kept saying, if she hugged her hard enough, she could bring her back to life. But the authorities, they informed her that she was absolutely not allowed near Ebony's body. And this was due to the fact that there could be a contamination of DNA evidence. And her DNA could mix with the killer's DNA and just cause a whole big fiasco during investigation. There was absolutely nothing that could be done to prepare Ebony's family for the other news that was to follow this. Andrew then went on to inform everyone in his police interview, and he just stated straight up that after he hog-tied Ebony, he stripped her naked, hog-tied her, and then brutally raped her before throwing her in the water. So, this confession completely rocked the entire community because they could not believe that someone could do something so awful to a child. It's just so disgusting. For the family, knowing that this really disgusting man raped their little Ebony before leaving her to drown while being hogtied was absolutely devastating and gut-wrenching. After the murder of their little girl, Christine said that she could not eat or sleep due to her pain and her depression. She quit her job, and all she did was just lie around. After all of this, she ended up calling her sister to come to her home to help out with her 2 older boys because she had felt like a zombie, not being able to feel or do anything, not even caring about anything or anyone. The murder of the poor 9-year-old Ebony Simpson, who was just a defenseless and innocent little girl who just wanted to come home from school, for Christ's sakes, just rattled the entire country. Families did not feel safe even to allow their children to ride the bus home from school anymore, because if someone did this to Ebony, they could certainly do this to other children. There was a complete community outrage about what happened to Ebony, and as no one believed that it should have happened, because honestly it really shouldn't have happened at all. Andrew was then ultimately scheduled for a court hearing in town, and right outside the courthouse was said to be an enormous crowd of furious locals. The crowd screamed obscenities at him, and they even went so far as to throw multiple items at him, like cups and rocks and all this other stuff, in a fit of rage. Police very quickly charged Andrew Garforth formally with the brutal murder of young Ebony Simpson. This had to have been just absolutely relieving to the family to know that this man would be held responsible for his disgusting actions. The official trial date is ultimately scheduled as the authorities search for as much evidence as possible to convict him of being there, and besides his confession, they just want to find as much evidence as they could that, he had in fact been the one to do this. So, as all of this was going on, Ebony's funeral would occur, and the family would ultimately lay their darling little girl to rest. So many people in the community attended both the funeral and the viewing of Ebony Simpson, including people who did not even know her or the family personally. Everyone in the community was absolutely just heartbroken about this, that an innocent little girl would be killed like this when she should have just been able to grow up like everybody else, go to school, live her life, and instead she had it senselessly taken from her. So when it comes to the death and the funeral of a young child, it just makes everything just so much harder. It hits you really hard. For the Simpson family, they now had to deal with this upcoming trial, and they had an absolutely unbearable amount of pain to go along with it, knowing the fact that their daughter had just been murdered. If it wasn't bad enough, the family had to continue living on without their baby girl and little sister. The murderer of young Ebony Simpson was only sentenced for a disgustingly short amount of time of 14 years. 14 years for murdering someone with no reason. It was just a young child. He just felt like he wanted to. So, obviously, this completely frustrated the family, because not only was he sentenced to 14 years, but he was also told that he could possibly get out after 8. Yeah. So, this was obviously very frustrating to the family, because they believed that Andrew deserved to be locked up for more time. And if this doesn't show you how completely fucked up the universal judicial system really was, I don't know what will, because seriously, that is so messed up. It literally seemed like all he was getting at this point was a slap on the wrist. Ebony's mother stood in front of the courts and begged and just pleaded for Andrew to be given the death penalty, to be executed for what he did to Ebony, or to have him completely incarcerated for life so he would never do this again. So, Christine then informed the courts that if he didn't get life in prison, she would find out about this, and she would go and search for a hitman and hire him to go and kill Andrew himself. I mean, I honestly cannot blame her for that, because it's literally her child. Her child was murdered, and now they're being told that the murderer would only be in jail for 8 years. That's bullshit. Bullshit. So, soon there was more information about Andrew Garforth that would come forward to the community. Everyone will find out about it. And it soon became known to the family that this man had the audacity to go out there and join the search party for young Ebony, knowing damn well that he was the one that murdered her. It's disgusting. It made Christine absolutely sick to her stomach because he knew where she was the entire time he was sitting there acting like he was going to help. Like, how truly fucked up of a person do you have to be to go out there and join the search party of the victim that you have just murdered? So 9-year-old Ebony, she suffered until the end of her young and innocent life. She had been hogtied, raped, and then tossed into the river like she didn't matter. And knowing this was almost too much for the family to bear. And if this all wasn't bad enough, there would even be even more tragedy to strike the family, because there was official news coverage that showed Andrew in the middle of the search team verifying what was in fact rumored. It's absolutely disgusting to know that he did that. He went out there in the middle of the search party. He actually he was like a leader of one of the search parties that was conducted, and he led them to try and go and help Ebony, because according to what was said in the news coverage, he felt so awful that something like this could have happened. This little girl could have gone missing, knowing damn well he was the one behind the whole damn thing. Like, it makes, you gotta be a sick human being for that. As Christine and the rest of the family tried to move on without Ebony, they try and create a change in the way that homicide victims, especially children, are handled by the police. It seemed to them that the authorities did not act quickly enough in this case, and because the killer was only getting, a slap on the wrist for what he did. He's like, oh, you killed someone? Bad. It just made them so upset. The family had then attempted to get some grief counseling done to help ease their pain, and it really does help, with getting the pent-up emotions out into the open. After a few times of just trying to find just one counselor, none of the counselors that they talked to wanted to come and help them, with the family, with their grief, because they all claimed that the case was just too sad to deal with. This pissed me off, because it's literally their job to go out there and help these families with their grief, regardless of what could have happened. You're supposed to be there to listen and to help. And instead you say, you don't want to help because, it's just too sad. Isn't that your damn job to help them no matter what? It just makes no sense to me. So there was a man, his name was John Merrick, and he got wind of this case and how the family had been trying to look for a grief counselor and was having no success. So he decided that he was going to step up to the plate and help them out. So he believed that the family was going to need as much support as they possibly could during this time. So he tried to reach out to Anita Cobby's parents. And Anita Cobby, if you don't know, she was a beauty pageant star, and she was a victim of a homicide in Australia as well when she was around 21 years old. So the group that was now officially known as the Homicide Support Group was ultimately created by Christine, John Merrick, and the parents of Anita Cobby. The founding members really bonded because they had all lost a loved one to homicide, minus John Merrick, I don't think he did, and they wanted to be able to formally support others as well who could have gone through the same thing, especially when it comes to your child. It's so frustrating and heartbreaking to know that a child had been murdered. Coincidentally, as the group began their official meetings, Andrew Garforth's murder trial would begin as well. During this trial, there'd be an incredible amount of evidence brought forward against Andrew, including the fact that he had left palm prints on the trunk of the vehicle, and there were fingerprints found that were scraping the underneath of the trunk, leaving fingernails behind that were ultimately traced back to Ebony. Not only were these clues found, but additionally there were also shoe prints found at the scene of the crime, and these prints were said to have matched Ebony's shoes that she had been wearing that day. Police also located Andrew's shoe prints nearby, and these did in fact match the shoes that he had been wearing that day. So, like I said, these were the shoes that the police had actually taken off of his feet the day that they arrested him, and they used it to compare to see if they were the same ones, and they were. Police were then, just frustrated by all of this. They're like, damn, we should have known. All of this information was hugely important and definitely went into the favor of the prosecution, especially when Andrew did not make any attempt to try and claim that he was innocent, and he actually pled guilty right away for the murder of Ebony. I mean, there were so many pieces of evidence in this case. already. Like the fact that they found his footprints, the fact that they found the scrapings, the fact that he even admitted to it, and he led them to the body. If you would have pled not, or said you were innocent and everything, they had just too much against him at this point for him to even say that. So he was just kind of fucked over at this point. After the trial, Andrew was then sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A whole 11 months after Ebony's murder, her killer was then sentenced to life in prison, for which he would ultimately perish behind bars. While he was handed the sentence, Andrew then tells his wife that he will see her in about 14 years. And this statement is just so disgusting because he was handed life and he was like, oh, I'll see you in 14 years. The fact that he was even still married, like, I would have divorced his ass as soon as I found out he killed a child. That's just me, though. But, like, he's literally told her that he would be out in 14 years. Like, it's so gross. And right in front of Christine and her family. So Christine was just absolutely pissed, like any of us would be. And she was quoted telling him, over my dead body. Again, I don't blame her for saying that. It felt like at this point that the Simpson family was actually the ones with the death sentence because it was quoted by some reporters, you know, that they felt like they were getting handed this death sentence because they had their daughter pass away while this guy gets to get out of jail after so many years. Andrew soon became he became pretty snarky in prison, and he turned into a very confident individual because he believed that he had actually played the system when it came to his the murder charges that he did. And he was like, oh, I won't get away with it. They'll just have me in here for a couple years. I won't be locked up for life. So in response for this, Christine, she snapped that people really needed to change the legal system because this was fucking disgusting that he was able to get out in 14 years after murdering a child, raping her, and leaving her to dry. Like, it's just so stupid and frustrating that they would do that. So he also stated that he would only stay in there for 7 or 8 years. He said, even though I'm sentenced for 14 years, I'll stay in there for 7 or 8. However, Andrew Garforth, he was no stranger to the legal system nor prison because he actually had a lot of previous convictions in Australia for petty crimes. But this crime was obviously more intense and more severe than anything else that he had ever done. And this meant that Andrew would end up spending more time in prison. He was ultimately the very first person in New South Wales to be handed a full life sentence without the possibility of parole, which blows my mind because that's just like, wow, the first one? Wow. Andrew was now stated to be officially spending the rest of his life in prison behind these prison bars for murdering Ebony in cold blood. And this upset Christine because she believed that Andrew, while he was staying here, would be rehabilitated back to society. This absolutely frustrated her because she wasn't able to have the same thing after what happened to her daughter being killed. And she just had to deal with this now for the rest of her life, knowing her baby girl had been murdered, while he gets to live in prison, you know, eating all this food and living his best life, watching TV, while she still has all of this pain. Despite all of this, Christine decided that it was going to be best to try and turn her grief into action by trying to implicate changes in the way that crime was being investigated by police. Christine really wanted to prevent this tragedy from ever happening again, so she really wanted to make sure that this tragedy that she had to endure would not happen to any other families. As a personal tribute to Ebony, in December of 1995, which was the same month that Ebony's birthday was. Her birthday, remember, is 3 days before Christmas. The official Ebony House would open in Australia. The charity would help provide assistance to families that were extremely affected by the murder of a loved one, just like what the Simpson family had to endure. The family would also go on to create many historic changes in the community, and this would help change the way that authorities would interact with the families of murdered loved ones. So this meant that even though the little girl had lost her life, her death would be used to help others in this situation. As the Simpson family tried to continue on with their lives, Andrew had done nothing but completely pain them continuously. And this was especially known to them after it came out that he had been viciously beaten and attacked in jail. Which, if you don't know about this, most people, like inmates and stuff, when it comes to prisons, they don't take kindly to child killers, child rapists, child molesters, and anything that involves a child. You know, you're going to get your ass beat. If you're not going to get your ass beat, you're going to get stabbed, you're going to get murdered, you know, all that stuff, because they hate people out there like that. I mean, yeah, they're criminals, but they also hate people who go out in there and murder children and harm children. So, you know, that happened to him, and he claimed that he had been beat up and just bashed viciously in the head by all of his cellmates, and he even said that he had PTSD and permanent hearing loss because of what happened to him. And because of this, he decided to apply for the victim's compensation. And the prison that he was in actually allowed this to go to court. They allowed him to go in there and try to get this victim's compensation because he got his ass beat for killing a kid. And this just really upset the family because they were like, he deserved to have this happen. And now he's going over here because he wants to get money out of what the fuck happened to him. Like, oh my God. So, however, once the authorities, they received, you know, like the courts and everything, they received Andrew's claims and everything, and this all went to trial. You know, it was quickly overturned right away. As soon as the judge saw this, they were like, yeah, no. And all of the money that he would be receiving due to this victim's compensation of getting his ass beat by the inmates all went towards local charities. Talk about, you know, going full circle, you know. Karma's a bitch, you know. You're going to go out there, you're going to kill a child, you get your ass beat, the money that you would have gotten goes towards charities. There is no other better form of karma out there, in my opinion, besides, you know, the killer gets killed, you know? It just frustrates me to no end that he actually wanted to get victims' compensation, knowing damn well that he had his own victim. Ugh. This dude, he's a mess. He really is. So, the counseling that Christine and her family ended up receiving after Ebony's murder did end up continuing for over several years. A lot of people had discussed in the support group that was created, and they brought in, you know, new changes in the legal system about what could be done to, you know, help prevent these similar tragedies, because no one deserves to die. Well, children really don't deserve to die, you know what I mean? Like, they're so young, they're so innocent, and this never should have happened. So one of the changes that was stated was that Andrew could not appeal his own conviction anymore. And this actually went through. If you don't know what appealing a conviction means, is that he goes to the court and say, can I be released? Can I be released? Can I be released? Just to get his time cut back more. So despite all of this, you know, 30 years later, you know, Christine still states that the pain that she felt is the same as it was back in 1992, which is so hard to have to hear. She claims that despite all of this going on, she is absolutely thrilled about what had been done in regards to Ebony's case and how he ended up getting his life in prison instead of only being in there for, 7 years, like he said. So she was just so happy with that. But she says that on the day that her daughter was murdered, she had a piece of her heart completely broken off and shattered into the wind. She is absolutely furious, frustrated, and heartbroken that something like this could occur to her and her child, especially when people over the years, as she's still grieving, tell her to get over it. They're like, oh, it's been so many years, why don't you just get over it, you know, stop grieving. You never get over the loss of a child, okay? You never get over that. And it just, it frustrates me to no end. I think it's been 30 years. Did I say 20? It's 30 years, sorry. And it just frustrates me to no end that people actually have the audacity to sit there and say, Stop whining and complaining and talking about what happened to your child when it happened so long ago. Just get over it. You don't get over the loss of your child. You don't get over the loss of your pet right away, so why should you just get over the loss of your child? It just, oh my God, it just makes me so upset. So Andrew had absolutely just ruined this family's life. And he had killed Ebony, and all these years later, he is still sitting in prison, and he still has absolutely no remorse for what he did to her. He actually still talks about that story with a smile on his face. He's like, oh, I killed her, and just smiles about it on camera. I mean, how sick and demented and twisted do you have to be to do all that? And, so gross. So I would like to know what you guys think about this case. Do you guys get frustrated? Are you guys as frustrated and angry about this as I am? The dude was only sentenced, well, he did say that he was going to be in there for, what, like 7 years? And then he ended up getting life in prison, tried to overturn it. It was all, and the fact that he sat there and helped with the search party to look for his own victim of the crime. Oh my God, like that is so messed up. It's seriously so messed up. Oh, I would like to know what you guys' thoughts and opinions are on this case down below in the comments section. Do you guys think it was disgusting that he helped out on the search party for his own victim? Are you guys happy that he finally got life in prison? He's gonna rot there for the rest of his life? Like, and let's leave some little nice comments down there for the family, because they definitely don't deserve any type of hate. You know, because from what I've heard and what I've read, you know, the family has endured hate from all these people saying that, you know, they wanted this to happen and all this other stuff. No one wants their child to fucking die. Like, I'm sorry, I gotta take a deep breath because that's just so frustrating. So, like I said, I would love to know your opinions down below. Don't forget to like this video, hit that subscribe button, and turn on your notification bell so that you never miss any of my videos. And like I said, I would love to know any other type of cases that you would like me to talk about. I'm also in the process of getting a brand new camera, which is so nice because I've been recording on my phone, and it comes with a microphone and everything. So I'm so excited for that. I hope you guys are going to be excited for that one too. And I hope you guys do not miss my next video, and I'll see you guys in my next one. And don't forget to leave some nice little comments down below for the family. Leave your thoughts on this case as well. Goodbye, guys.